In the previous video, we extensively went over how I texture the stone surfaces of the Apexis tower. On the screen now, you can see a comparison of the work back then and what I've created and progressed with since then. Most of the changes you see are in the shape of details and hand-painted textures on the golden trims. Last time I didn't have chance to work on those. As such, the past hours I slowly went through every spike, trim and geometrical loop in order to give it an actual WoW styled texture detail. In this video, we'll cover exactly that. We'll look in depth on my process of hand painting the metallic, golden parts of the tower. When the video is finished, you'll hopefully have insight and ideas of how to tackle metallic surfaces. But before we dive into anything further in this video, let's take a look at a quick overview of the different parts and what you'll see. PBR Values. We go over the different texture channels in physically based rendering and how they are useful to our art. Higher dimensions. In addition to the value that we see in the base color, there is an extra dimension, roughness. We go over that. Trial paint. I test a small portion of the mesh by hand, painting only that region. Blending mode. We explore the blending modes in Substance Painter, akin to Photoshop. Trial done. We preview the work after the trial paint. End result. We look at details and screenshots and footage of the end result of all of the metallic surfaces. For my stylized art to be successful, there are certain channels in my texturing that I need to keep track of. I need to have values in each of those that represent the material surface well and give me the visual presentation that I am after. Those are albedo, base color, roughness, metal, normal, ambient occlusion, or also known as AO. I want to use it though as I bake my AO inside of my albedo. In order to accomplish the WoW art style, I heavily rely on albedo and roughness. Metal is a channel where I've placed a flat value of white for the golden trims, telling the engine that this is indeed a type of metal. Normal is where my high polyscoped intricacies of the surface reside in the form of a 2D representation, the texture, the bitmap itself. These give me high detail on the surfaces, but frankly, my normal maps are mostly blank, as the stylized visual of WoW doesn't really call for anything complicated in there in the normal maps. Let's start with the albedo and see all of the hand painting that I do there. Afterwards, we'll take a quick look at the roughness channel as well. When I paint my albedo, there are three things I mostly care about. One is the lightness value of the color that I pick to paint with. Second is the saturation, how intense in color the value is. Third and final, there is the chroma, or the hue, value of the color that I pick. I order them in my mind like above, but in programs like Photoshop we often navigate this space by using a color picker that looks at hue, saturation and brightness, in that specific order that I just went through, an HSB color picker more specifically. I look at those three things as a 3D vector. One line moves me across the hue of my color, a second line moves me around how saturated or intense the chroma of my color is, a third line moves me across light and darkness. When I hand paint, I navigate that 3D space. You could imagine me moving around the gamut, the color gamut. I know what values to pick mostly from practice in painting and learning over the years how to juxtaposition lightness and darkness together with saturation and hue. Here, painting this WoW art style, I introduce a higher dimension. It's a fourth dimension. It's a new vector of value that I move across, represented by black and white. This is my roughness channel. In my roughness representation, white shows a surface as highly rough, When light hits that surface, the light is diffused through its bumpy, rough surface, and what our eye perceives as a result is a mostly non-reflective surface. In that same representation, black shows a surface that is highly glossy. When light hits that surface, it's reflected back to the eye without nearly as much diffusion. The result is us seeing a surface as glossy and shiny. All of that might sound really complicated for dimension, light diffusion and dispersion as seen in physics. It really isn't nearly as scary as it sounds. There is one thing to understand and remember, the thing that makes or breaks the stylized art on this tower. Whenever I pick color for my hand painting, if my roughness value associated with it, where that hand painting is, ends up being too low on roughness, a dark value, meaning a glossy surface, the way we perceive color will naturally change. If I am hand painting a dark region with shadows and I happen to make it too glossy, it will look overly reflective, bright and busy. As such, for my regions of my hand painting that are in dark, I strive to keep rough values closer to white on the roughness scale. Then the opposite is true too. Whenever I hand paint highlights that happen to be at the high points of the geometry, I want to make sure that I make them somewhat glossy, closer to black on the roughness scale. That way they will appear reflective, bright and shiny. With these things in mind, I go into testing a small section of the hand painting. I start with a vague idea of what I might need to hand paint in order to accomplish the style that I imagine in my head, also the one that I see on my reference board. I know that I will take in steps the hand painting of these details. Namely, I will go through first giving regions of dark dents to all of the golden surfaces, then I will go in and hand paint areas of middle tone highlights. If I were to know exactly the values and colors that will work here, I would do the above uniformly for all of the surfaces. I would spend some good 30-40 minutes maybe hand painting the darks everywhere. Then I would move on to spending 30 or 40 more minutes of hand painting the midtones everywhere. Then rinse and repeat for large highlights, then small highlights, then chipping and imperfections. However, I don't know the exact values and chromas that will accomplish the visual that I want. I have a pretty good guess that comes from the experience I have into the art, but nonetheless, I will not want to commit all of my time doing something I'm not certain will work at all. As such, my approach is to start small. I get a triangular trim piece that is seen on one spot of the tower. It's a UV island with a simple shape, and its appearance gives me immediate ideas of where I might want the shadows and the highlights on it. This small triangular trim will be my trial ground. I will paint on it all of the details and all of the ideas I have, from darks to midtones to highlights. I will give it my best, and when I think I've accomplished the texturing that I want, I will test it inside of Unreal 5. I do tweaks, and once I settle on a visual that I approve, I know that these colors, this entire process of hand painting is the one that works for me. It's the one that I could use for all of the surfaces on the tower. We saw a time lapse of me painting the details on this triangular trial trim. Here is a step-by-step showcase. I go through each layer of my hand painting and you can see the different colors that I put in. The first colors that I used for darks, midtones and highlights looked good in Substance Painter. However, when I tested them inside of Unreal 5, I saw that they don't exactly look great. All of the work was too high contrast. WoW and any good looking stylized art style has a subtle undertone to it. You have hand-painted darks and lights, but they're in a nice flow and complement the base natural value of the texturing. As such, after seeing it and realizing this is the case inside of Unreal 5, I went back to Painter in order to tweak what I had just painted. I didn't want to delete it and start from scratch, that wasn't the point. I had made something good, it just needed balancing. As such, I changed the opacity of some of the layers in my stack. Then on the entire layer stack, I start to shuffle through the different blending modes. It gives me immediate different experimentations and visuals. I knew that one of these blending modes ought to steer me into the right direction. I have to admit that I hadn't used the blending modes inside of Painter a lot. That's because most of the texture work I do inside of Painter in my previous projects or at work at Rebellion is always PBR and realistic. However, I knew that the blending modes in Painter are created to replicate the blending modes that we see in Photoshop, the ones that we've had for decades now. As such, from my experience with those, I knew there will be a mode that I really like. After going through all of them, I set out on a blending mode that I forgot the name, but I'll put it on the screen. I used it and I immediately pushed my painting to one that is much less contrasted but also more saturated in a nice way. I exported that, did some of my tweaks for my roughness values, and I gave that a spin inside of Unreal 5. I immediately loved the result. Now that I had created this small trial, one triangular piece taken to a very refined visual, and that visual I approved and I liked, I went through the entirety of the rest of the tower and its trim pieces, and I hand painted the details following this recipe that I had just discovered. While I'm chatting this stuff, we can actually see a bit more of that on the screen. I go through the spikes, I go through the lower parts and through the upper parts of the tower, and I hand paint all of these different details. They bring me closer to the World of Warcraft art style. And here, with everything done, we can see the final result. I will put a comparison on the left screen and on the right side of the screen, showcasing before and after the hand painting. As per usual, this was the latest video in the Pexis Mage Tower series. Make sure to actually watch the previous ones. There ought to be something interesting and something that you can learn in there. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe and to like. Engage with the video and leave a comment. Is there a part that you really liked or something that you weren't really sure after my explanations? Put your questions forward and I'll make sure to answer and help you in whatever way I could. Thank you very much for watching. Up until next time. If I can imagine some version of the purgatory or some version of hell, I think it would be me being asked all the time to do selections of certain regions of text on an iPhone or any smartphone really. I don't know how this is awkward tech after so many years.